Hello and welcome to episode 118 of Decentralized Revolution. Of course, it's the Mises Caucus podcast. We are doing this live thing again, and we have a great guest this week. When we started making the list of like, hey, who do we want to have on? Once we get some of the kinks worked out, this guy was at the top of the list. Maj, how you doing?
I'm great. What's up with y'all?
Not much. We're busy. Brandi and Mike and I are doing this thing. Mike, of course, is how is the sleep thing going, Mike, with the new baby?
So far, so good, man. It's gonna get worse because Emily hasn't had to go back to work yet. That's when it's gonna get tough. You know what I mean? Because like she can sleep in with the baby right now. So, like, I try to tell her wake me up, and she doesn't. You know what I mean? So I'll sleep through him crying.
Well, you're just banking that sleep for when you're going to need it, right? So
Yeah. No. Here's the thing. Nobody told me that at around 4 or 5 weeks that the poops get real. like it's actual poop now. Like it's not squirts. It's like I own a little monkey now. You know what I mean? Like, and yeah.
All right.
It's cool though. It's cool.
That's good. So one thing I know that we're going to talk about our I don't know what to call them, our people up in New Hampshire. I don't know if there are people. I don't know. Who knows? But another thing that's been going around this week was the whole letter. So somebody sent out a letter to a bunch of the Mises Caucus supporters with the shocking revelation that Michael Heise has earned some money running a political organization that's done a lot of stuff over the last 5 years. Mike, how do you feel about these shocking allegations? We are trying to keep it covered up that we pay you a measly amount of money for what you've done.
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is that it was posed in such a way as to like suggest that I take like a huge amount of like a huge percentage of the money that comes in, and like I've made like $100,000 in a year. I think I've made like I saw Jason Rink posted it. I haven't even counted up what I made, but he put it together and said that I've made $120,000 over the course of 3 years, and this is my full-time job as of June or July 2021.
Right.
And the funny thing is like our donors, maybe not the newest ones, but we did donor town halls. I did like 3 or 4 of them back in 2021, expressly letting people know that we were talking about giving me a $60,000 a year salary to go full time and to like get a war general grow like a full time going into Reno and all of that stuff. So, everybody had good feedback. We put it to the board. The board voted for it. And yeah, man, I was able to be a full-time libertarian for 2 years. We got the Reno reset. We got the messaging of the Libertarian Party on track. We've got our political strategy focusing on, localization and nullification and all the things that we said we were going to do. We did. We did a tour. We're recruiting candidates. We're training candidates. We did all of that. So I have now strapped in for the long haul and, scaled the salary back to part-time and took another job. So the salary's been slashed anyway. But yeah, to think that the bulk of our supporters didn't know that is pretty funny. And there's been a number of tweets or messages where somebody was like, I am doubling what I make because of or what I donate to the Mises Caucus because of, them trying to paint this a certain way. So
right. And that's the thing, is someone who's on board myself. I mean, we're pretty, we're pretty stingy when we have to be. I actually get like a small stipend for doing the emails and the podcasts and stuff like that. And, it's all out there. I mean, it's, of who makes what. But it's funny that I've been involved with the LP since 2010. And there's always this, like, if anybody like doesn't like, volunteer 100 hours a week and go into their pocket for everything, then somehow they're on a grift or something like that. Like, how do you handle that, Maj? Do people come at you saying things like, hey, this is not really what it is? Like, how do you deal with that energy when it comes up?
I don't deal with it anymore. I think that the general public sees what good people are doing with resources that are coming in. I personally think Mike should have been making $250,000 a year. That's what I think that Mike has been one of the most principled people that I've met in all of my walks of life. And I think he's fought insurmountable odds that everybody pretty much counted out. So that in and of itself, I think he should. I mean, man, I've had months where, without being too specific, I've had months where I've had really good T-shirt sale months, and to suggest that Mike is doing something like that is actually not. It's not only is it rude for the reason of, um, and I say doing something like that, I mean in the sense of it's rude that you guys are even saying that what he was paid is too much.
Yeah.
That's rude. So I don't even listen to those people. It's usually the people that have never ran a business, never created a movement,
Yeah.
never really like scaled something. To scale a bunch of people, a ragtag motley crew bunch of individuals, to get on a collective page, I think that's something that is genuinely difficult. And then to say we're going to put the work in for 5 years or so, and then take over the third largest political party in the country. I think when I think people are not doing they're doing themselves a disservice by not looking at what overall the great groups of people and individuals and collectives across the country that had to work to make that happen.
Yeah.
So when people say stuff like that to me, I usually consider the source. If because I listen to it, but I don't engage it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you should do is you should consider the source, and if this person is kind of like just somebody,
Nameless source. Nameless
that-
source. No return
the point.
address.
No
Yeah.
return address, no name, no organization. So
Yeah.
that tells you the quality of what we're dealing with here.
So it's like more of a if I can't even consider the source. I tweeted something a few days ago where I said I respect Twitter pages more. It's not that I disrespect those other pages, but I respect the pages more that showcase and speak, I'm the person and here's my face. It just shows a different level of principle. It shows a different level of I stand on what I said. And don't get me wrong, some people have privacy issues. They don't want extreme people to get them fired from their job. So I'm not saying that I there's no merit to it. But when someone has absolutely no source, and which means I can't even really figure out what they actually do and what they've actually built, it's very, very difficult for me. When I'm around really, really solid bodybuilders, because I'm really getting more into that, and boxers and fighting, when they see people that are in the gym for like the first time, they don't make fun of them. LeBron James or Kevin Durant isn't making fun of somebody that is on their journey as a basketball player.
Yeah.
And so Messi isn't going to laugh at a 15-year-old that isn't the greatest yet at his position on the soccer field.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the professionals know that this is a part of the ugly part of this journey of building something. The people that are usually in the bleachers, usually in the nosebleed sections, are the people that have all of the critiques for the actual professionals.
Yeah.
And so when I hear that type of stuff, now I'm kind of numb to it. And I sometimes wish I still had those feelings, because those feelings are dead for me anymore. Like I've been called everything, you know what I'm saying? And it doesn't, I can't even get the feeling of being angry anymore because it's nothing at this point.
I just got to say, though, from
Yeah.
the bleachers, fuck James Harden.
You know,
Is he? Are they gonna? He's not going to be a. Yeah, you're.
We don't even have to get into the Sixers, man. I got my
your guys-
Sixers groups.
They laid down in that one game, man. I don't know what happened there.
Shut
I
up.
felt sorry for you guys. I was talking to my wife. I was like, "Oh man, Maj and Mike and Jeff are crying right now."
I think that the general public, we got to remember in our messaging, we got to remember the people that really are not in this to really win. And we have to think that we have to remember that they're like the Heath Ledger's character when he played the Joker. And he's like, he just wanted to see the world burn. There's a story where Bruce Batman's butler was telling him like, yo, some people just want to see the world burn. And a lot of these people that are doing stuff like that, they just kind of want to see the world burn. And if you can pull a lesson from them, then that's the thing that you should pull from them. But if it's not a lesson, I don't even think about it any further.
Yeah, and before we get into answering the question about Mike's cat, is the lesson? You talk about wanting to watch the world burn. I think a lot of the people who have come at the Mises Caucus And again, because I was involved with the LP for a few years before the Mises Caucus came along. And what I found out, and I actually had kind of dropped out and like, hey, I'm done with this, because I found that for a lot of people, this was just like their hobby, right? They kind of got off on going to meetings and doing bylaws and occasionally putting out a press release and putting their name on the ballot for city council. And it was like, I call it LARPing at politics, like the live action role play. I'm a congressman,
Yeah.
And so a lot of those people, they had this club, they had this, they had their own little thing, big fish in a very small pond.
Right.
Somebody came along to change how things worked. Their little role playing club is gone, and we're trying to get to that next level. And there's lots of bumps, and we're not as far as we wanted to be, but we're a lot farther than we were. And so some of those people are still bitter because they don't have their club anymore. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah,
So,
it's good that they're bitter. They should get bitter and they should leave.
yeah,
You should either or get better. If
Get
you if
good.
Yeah, if you get good and out and best us with work,
yeah,
then we have to work harder. You ever see those but like in the Christmas time Budweiser, those horses where they use those commercials. One of those horses can like pull like 2 metric tons, like one of those horses. And quite naturally, if you put two of them together and you ask somebody, yo, how many of these two horses, I think they're called Clydesdales, if I'm not mistaken, but you would quite naturally, you would say, oh, there's two of them. They could probably pour full 4 tons. They usually, when it's two of them, they pull between like 6 to 8 tons, because
yeah,
the horse next to each other, when they're next to each other, they work harder because they compete with each other stronger when there's a person next to them.
yep,
the
yep,
the people that don't like what is happening right now, I want you to get yoked up next to us and outwork us.
yep,
And if not, you should disappear and be quiet. And it doesn't really matter because I can't even see you. I can only see you when I can use you for your energy to motivate myself and our team.
yep,
Other than that, I have you don't really exist. So if you want to actually beat us, you should work harder. I am going to make sure that I'm working very, very hard to embarrass you completely based off of ignoring you and doing work. I am going to work very, very hard to make sure that we're getting the libertarian movement in this urban demographic. And if you want to get on, get yoked next to me and we can pull 6 or 7 or 8 metric tons because we're gonna need a lot of work, then
yep.
cool. But if not, I need you My Little Ponies to just go over to the side and go play because I'm busy.
Well, we gotta answer the big questions and then get to some topics.
Yeah.
I think the pressing question right now is this is Gadget. Uh, this co-host here is Gadget. So I guess we'll end that piece by saying, if you appreciate the work of the caucus, yes, I was full-time for 2 years. I'm part-time now, but we're still training candidates. We're still going for nullification. We're still going for decentralization. We're still guiding the Libertarian Party. Because I'll make this one point, because I have seen it where some people are like, well, why do we need the caucus if you already took over the party? And it's a fundamentally Hoppian point, which is that we already saw what happened to the Libertarian Party over the course of about 20 years when the democracy inside of the party was left to its own devices. Just the same way that democracy in the country kind of appeals to the lowest common denominator of the average voter.
Yeah.
Democracy within the Libertarian Party led to a lowest common denominator LP, and it lost its way. So we organize so that we can keep the party in line with a strategic vision in the long term, and with bold messaging in the long term and principle messaging in the long term. That's the long and short of it. So lpmisescaucus.com/donate. Gadget would really appreciate it.
You can also takehumanaction.com. You can sign up for the newsletter there and do all that. And also we do other things, and we won't go into it right now, but the Project Decentralized Revolution stuff is a lot of it is along with the LP, but some of it's very different. So, but speaking of the LP and speaking of working together with others in the party, Mike, you guys I'll let you bring up the topic that we kind of
Well,
wanted
what I
to
wanted to
use to
start
talk
with,
about a couple different things.
well, yeah, and what I wanted to start with, this is why we wanted you to come first, Maj, because we've worked a lot together. I know you, I know where you're at with things, but then you go to Twitter, and some people would have you believing, oh, Maj believes in reparations, he believes in a white tax, all of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity, and I think Brandy's going to have some questions as well.
Yeah.
On your position on this, because again, I know you in a way that Twitter doesn't, and I know that you're being strawmanned. So,
Yeah.
like, I wanted you to come on and give your perspective on reparations and your position on reparations.
So I think everybody fundamentally can agree that America, as great of a nation as it is, has a fundamental stain on its flag, and that's obviously slavery. Now, I have to lead in with yes, I do think that classic liberals were in a what they felt was a precarious position. I also think that the people that led the thought, those French revolutionaries and that type of liberty energy that went into the guys that made some of the founding documents, those people, some of those guys were like, no, this is a contradiction. We can't do it. Thomas Paine comes to mind. So I want to be clear that even though it was a societal norm all throughout world history, you can't say, or you can, but it's a contradiction if you say, we the people, liberty for all, except this group of people. Now, the economic component that goes into it and all of that, those arguments are there, but I have to highlight the contradiction as well as the framework. So, um, and also saying this misnomer or straight up myth that every single white person in America during that time owned humans, that is false. That is false. And so I want to be clear and give context in that way. Now, when we're talking about it from a um, labor perspective, when we're talking about it from a property perspective, when we're talking about it from a contractual perspective, these are all things that are in alignment with libertarians. You'll get no argument from a libertarian saying, hey, what was the contract? Hey, whose labor was used? Whose labor was stolen? And who was identified as the property? And what did that property or that labor, what did it build? You would also be hard pressed to hear people say, no, the so-called slaves, I'll say captives because slave comes from a Slavic, but the captives that built these plantations, what were they? Were they the actual plantation owners all of the time? Absolutely not. So you have stolen labor, you have people used as property, you have years going by, you have after emancipation, you have groups of people that were emancipated, for lack of a better term, because that means transfer of ownership. And they were told they were going to be made whole by the United States government. That's where the whole 40 acres thing comes from. Andrew Jackson gets in and says, psych, this is not what we're doing. So your labor, forget it. The contract that we had with you for after fighting for us and helping us win, forget that contract. And we're just basically reneging on what we said. On top of that, a lot of those plantations and land that was supposed to be earmarked for the descendants or those people that were captives and the descendants of those captives were given to the actual slave owners. This is not me making this up. This is not me. There's tons of information out here about this. So when you have this conversation about making something whole, if we as libertarians agree in property rights and labor being stolen is not okay, and if we also say that we had a contract, America, the state, had a contract with a group of people and they reneged on it, we have to say that that's kind of like a great conversation as it relates to how libertarianism would get behind reparations. However, the way that it's packaged is like a white people tax. Like, y'all are white, so y'all owe me $20 every week out of your check. And that's just false. That's just false. Now, it also does not mean that it's a easy endeavor to partake upon. I think, the argument that Walter Block had a conversation about this. I forget the guy. Mike sent me the link again very recently. It was a YouTube video where they're having this discussion about reparations. And the labor perspective is where Walter Block was coming from with it. But I agree that this conversation that every single white person owes every single black person, and it's just that cut and dry, that's silly. And I think it will be very, very difficult for individuals or collectives of groups to hold the state as well as prove these corporate charters, not just white people, corporate charters like Norfolk Southern, like Wells Fargo, like a bunch of insurance companies. I think it's a big endeavor, but I think it can be done. An example of that was maybe less than a year ago, there was a family that had some beachfront property right out in California. I think it might have been in like the Los Angeles area generally, but anyway, they proved that their home, their family's home, they were the descendants of a person, and it was stolen. Los Angeles County had to give it back. That is a form of reparations. This is my property. The labor that my family worked on to get this property, it was stolen. When that property was stolen, you have to give it back. This is not an anti-libertarian perspective. This is not a Maj is advocating that everybody that's white owes black people this thing, this whatever this number is. And it also is not me saying that I have the exact 100% answer, because if I was getting reparations and I tied things in as an individual and fought that all the way back up and proved here's how my lineage was harmed, here's how the labor was stolen, here's how the property was damaged, so forth and so on, I might not want it in fiat currency. I might want it in Bitcoin. I might want it in land, like the United States government said that they were going to give. So I'm also not saying I have the end all be all, nor am I the subject matter expert. But what I am going to say is, if you don't even inform yourself about it as it relates to African American people asking or starting a conversation about reparations, if you don't know what reparations actually means, if you don't educate yourself on things like the reparations assessment group that Johnny Cochran was doing before he died. This was an assessment group that was going to look at all of the corporate charters. I named a few just here shortly ago. All of those corporate charters that existed then, that benefited, that still are in existence to this day, and the profits that came from them. That will be coming from corporate charters, not individuals.
Yeah.
So I think the people that are not even being open-minded enough to look at some of the most storied libertarians that have positions on this, Rothbard too as well. If they're not even looking at that from that perspective, they're letting the media tell them a narrative of what reparations actually means, and they're not even open to listening. They're doing themselves a disservice. And I also believe, because you'll have people say, well, African nations, here it is right here. Literally, should white European slaves, Irish, Scots, French, who worked in the mills in Lawrence, Lowell, Nashua, and all up and down the Merrimack should get reparations as well. If you are willing to do the due diligence to prove that your labor and or your property was stolen, then you should have at it. Go do it. The thing that's always funny to me is when there's a collective of black people. Again, these are all libertarian concepts: labor, property rights, labor usage or theft, as well as contracts. Now, as soon as black people start having this conversation, now everybody forgets all of their libertarian perspectives. And that's stupid. That's stupid. That's just wrong. So when that question says, well, should the XYZ, if you want to, go do the work, this is not an easy task, which is why I say I do think that there's a stain on the American flag. That does not mean that I hate America. I'll re-up on America every year. But what I am saying is, when people throw these straw mans out there like, well, what about the white people? White people in America, there has been already several groups of people in American history that get reparations from the United States government. Stop. Do more research before you talk. The Japanese people in the internment camps, family, received reparations. Stop. We're saying these things as if we don't understand the concept of Game of Thrones. Oh, Khaleesi's the rightful ruler. Oh no, it's Jon Snow. He's the rightful ruler, right? Jon Snow and Khaleesi wasn't alive when their lineage got wrong. So you understand these concepts, but you're not being open-minded, and you're letting media tell you what these concepts actually are.
Let's dig into it a little bit. I mean, Brandi, I know you had some questions. I have a perspective, but I'll let you go.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that makes me feel uneasy about it is it's basically like punishing the sins of a great grandson of their great father. So and that, like, this question right here, Oh wait, nope, wrong question. But it wasn't your labor; it was someone else's labor who died before you were born.
Okay, so labor and property. So if let's use the example that you just gave. Your great great grandfather has an amazing watch, and he got it from his father and his father before him. And I show up. My great great grandfather shows up, and your great grandfather works really really hard. He gets this amazing Rolex. He wants to pass it down, and my great great grandfather steals it. Right? Years later, it gets down to us, and you can prove that my great great grandfather and his labor, it's not even a conversation that you can prove that my great grandfather stole your great grandfather's watch. It's insignia, the paperwork comes up, whichever way you want to do it. Your great grandfather, my great grandfather stole from you. Should I keep the watch?
Well, but labor is also hard to quantify. Like,
can I give a caveat here? Because I think there's a key component. I think there's a key component that's not being highlighted enough. It's that one, this is not like because the example that Maj gave is Walter Block's example. And the idea is essentially that you don't have a right to receive stolen goods. However, a tort can only be applied to individuals. So this isn't some kind of broad, there's a white tax, and the person who is alleging a tort has to have the evidence, right? Like has to have the evidence of the tort, like for it to hold water in a court. So I think we're like, at least with the Block Rothbard way of looking at it, is that you're looking at an extremely narrow number of people who, A, they can prove lineage, B, they can prove that that there was essentially property that should have gone to them, or things that they built that would have been there, that they would have owned if they were not slaves, that then was taken from them. And if you can prove that down, and then prove that it is owned by this this family who received those stolen goods, or received by this corporation who received stolen goods, then you can actually make a case of a tort. Now, we're also talking about something 200 years ago, over 200 years ago. So logistically,
just because we're talking about something that's difficult does not mean that if we're not saying that there's a statute of limitations, just because we're saying it can be difficult doesn't mean that it's something that people don't have a right to examine or look into if they choose to. Again, right. like the family in Los Angeles County that said we can literally prove that this property was stolen. You have to give it back. That's literally what happened. You did something. We were not made whole. You have to make us whole. Then
was it someone's like ancestor that stole the property and then they had to give it back and that person was dead? Is that what happened?
Yes. Now, here's the other argument, because it wasn't like great grandmom is still alive and we transfer it to great grandma. It was, I'm the descendant of this person. Here's where you stole it. And again, we're not talking about it not being this isn't like a easy conversation or an easy task to undertake. I'm not arguing it would be difficult to figure that out. If you want to chase that, then cool, if you want to. What I'm talking about is this argument of this, to Mike's phrasing, the straw man argument that it's absolutely ridiculous completely. And this is before we go into the conversation about, okay, the United States government said, okay, we're going to solve this thing. We sanctioned unjustified things. Sometimes government, who knew, sometimes government gets things wrong. They said we got this wrong. We will give these folks 40 acres. These folks, this was supposed to be handled however long ago. The Andrew Jackson gets in and reneges and says, psych. So you
is that what you were talking about when it comes to reparations? Is like the people that were supposed to get that?
I'm talking about all of those things. I'm talking, it's not just, this is the other thing that happens a lot around complex subjects. People pick one part or one thing and say, well, this is it. And no, it won't work this way. And instead of looking at it as a complex, because again, I just gave several different examples. The example of whether we're talking about labor, whether we're talking about a contract, whether we're talking about property. Those are just different avenues of what the broader conversation around reparations would look like. My argument here is because let me be perfectly honest. Me individually, it's not a undertaking that I want to individually do myself. It does seem like a lot of work. It does seem like I can rumble and get a bunch of other resources and just go buy the 40 acres. Me personally, right? That's me. But what I'm saying is, the level of dismissal as if there's not an argument to be had because it's not libertarian. One, it's wrong. It's wrong. That level of dismissal because it's not libertarian enough, it's just wrong. As well as number two, the level of like hate or almost like a negative energy around this concept, as opposed to having a genuine, we are supposed to pride ourselves on being principled and have the ability to have civil dialogue. But I've yet to get so much vitriol towards me, a person that has clearly actively doing stuff for the liberty movement, right? In a demographic where we need it the most. I've never seen as much vitriol in my life from this demographic or certain sections of people in the libertarian movement, other than when I talk about the conversation around reparations. Again, a conversation that has roots in libertarian concepts. So to me, it's like, go ahead.
Let me ask you one question, Maj. This is a simple one, Aaron. This one's simple, quick. I just want to address a couple comments. Mm-hmm. So just to be absolutely crystal clear, we are not talking about, well, I should say you are not talking about taxes in any way, shape, or form within this framework, right?
No. Like, no.
Yep.
Like that would be me. Now, will I call a contradiction when the United States government says we can't have the conversation about reparations in fiat currency? They don't say fiat, but you get what I mean. We can't have a conversation about reparations because it would be too difficult to have, and we don't got the money, right? When the administration says that, then they go fire off the same money machines and then send billions upon billions of dollars to Ukraine, to Black America. That's like, well, wait, we can't have this conversation at all, but because you ain't got it. But then you go give it to a whole nother thing that does not help race relations. The problem is people come into the conversation with me around reparations on one topic where I'm highlighting maybe a contradiction, and they think that's the sum total of the conversation. Anybody that would advocate for more taxes just to pay off a debt is wrong. That's why a big chunk of that is me saying corporate charters. Yeah. Corporate charters that that exist beyond the single life of one person, right? Wells Fargo is really old, right? And it's not a white people tax, and it's not a tax at all. But the problem is people hear that word, and I just challenge everybody to look into things before you just rush to go, oh, leftists said it, so it's just automatically bad, right? People hear that word and they respond to it the way that leftists respond to the word Trump. And it's like, have you actually just sat down and this is probably like one of the first times where I've been even allowed, and I say allowed because people cut you off or they end the conversation. Well, I've actually been allowed to actually, in a longer format, kind of explain different concepts and kind of like where it's coming from, as opposed to people just going, you said reparations. That means you're saying print up money printer, go brr, and just hand out the bread. And I've even said myself, like, bro, what if tomorrow they was like, yep, I proved, here's my family. They were from Albany, Georgia. I can trace that lineage. And then the government goes, or the courts say, damn, you're right. How do you want your reparations? I'd be at almost an impasse because I have to say, damn, do I want land? Do I want zero taxes for me and my lineage? Damn, do I want it in Bitcoin? Do I want it in whatever? So I'm not purporting to have all of these answers. I'm saying there's a robust conversation to be had here that is a much better way to dialogue, as opposed to being dismissive, to being rude, and not even taking the time to scroll back a bit to see some of the most powerful libertarian minds that had conversations around this.
Well, I wanted to jump. I wanted to jump in on a couple things because one is I think that a lot of the comments I'm seeing, not just the ones we put on the screen, they seem to be focusing on the impracticability of it, which I think is a thing. So I think that like for example, Israel Palestine, there are people in Palestine right now who have the keys to the house that the Israelis pushed their grandparents out of, and they can see their house.
Yeah.
Right? That's a pretty simple one, but 150 years ago, that's a little more difficult. But I think you're right, Maj, is that as someone who's been, I'm kind of old, and I remember even back like when Clinton came in, somebody, I think Randall Robinson was the guy's name or whatever. Like there was this big movement then. It was like, oh, we got a Democrat in, let's do reparations. And again, coming from the left, and it was like it was basically like, hey, let's put these. Yeah, we're not going to go and trace all these things. We're just going to like give certain subsidies to certain people or groups based on whatever, and that's going to come out of the treasury. And so I think you have a long history of people from the left making this argument, and libertarian adjacent people are going to look at see where the reparations argument has come from in the past.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right, Maj. They're knee-jerk reacting to that instead of having a conversation that we're having tonight. And I think
I'm sympathetic to this. But go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe a different word.
Yeah, the different word. But I know. Hang on. I know Brandi had a question.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
I mean, I honestly.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think that the issue, I agree with you when you say that it's like people immediately hear the word reparations and are like, oh my God, and I'm not in that position. I'm actually in more of a curiosity, trying to really understand how this would work and what it would look like. And like, if this framework, like, it's really hard for my brain to be like, okay,
it would be civil suits.
Theoretically, even though it's hard for my brain to be like, oh, but I don't see the probability, like how are they going to prove it, And also, like, it also kind of sets a bad precedent to a degree, because, okay, this could transfer over to, like, say someone's great-grandfather was a serial killer, and they killed a bunch of people, and nobody found out till he died. And then they find out way later, and he has kids, and what if they want, like, I don't know, reparations of some type? Like, I know it's not actual, like,
well, there's posthumous convictions. There's posthumous. Yeah, there's posthumous convictions. What it would look like. So what it would look like, at least within this framework, is civil suits. Now, Liberty Dad, who was a great libertarian in Florida, has a podcast, Liberty Dad podcast. Subscribe. I am sympathetic to that argument. Like, just the same way that like the word liberal is gone, and that used to be us, like in our tradition, and that was taken after like the Great Society and everything. I am sympathetic that reparations is probably a gone word. However, go ahead.
I just think that whatever term you call it, I'm always a stickler for explaining things fully, right? So when I say classic liberal to someone, I know that word has been co-opted, so I give a fuller explanation, and those are like teachable moments. If somebody wants to, I saw somebody say, call it arbitration, civil suits, whichever way. The duty is on you. If you want to do it as an individual, right? The duty is on you. If you want to get a collective group of people and prove it, then so be it. But I think that the bigger thing is when I'm talking, my job primarily is outreach in urban communities. Yeah. That's my primary job. When I see libertarians not even being willing to listen, because they're responding, like Aaron said, in a knee-jerk fashion, because they have not educated themselves. I want them to stop and think when someone says classic liberal, or when you're trying to educate someone on libertarianism, when the mainstream narrative that says, oh, you guys are like MAGA, you guys are just like Republican light. Mm-hmm. There is an educational moment there. You don't just have a knee-jerk reaction and just go, what? And start yelling and shutting down. It is silly. It is silly. And in this last 10 minutes, I've explained several ways. And I'm not saying y'all personally, because not you guys, right? I'm saying there's a conversation to be had around it. If you are having this thing where I'm so smart that I can't be wise, and I'm not open to listening to anything else, and I'm telling you, if you approach this right, and even just saying, hey, we're having a conversation, and what does that look like? And we can show that the United States government, the overreaching government, the state is the culprit, as opposed to every single white person. You have more, you've done more for developing inroads into a democratic community. Not saying that you're pandering, but you're saying this is a conversation that could be fruitful for race relations in America. This is a conversation that could be fruitful for showcasing, at least at the very least, how bad the state is. This is a conversation that could be had for inroads into, hey, black community, did you know that the United States government, the same one that's dangling reparations in front of your face every 4 years as a conversation piece, this is the same state that took it away from you or your elders and ancestors years ago after they agreed to it. These are ways to open up conversations as inroads, as opposed to what we're seeing now is this knee-jerk reaction because you don't understand it. You think libertarian, similar to lefties think libertarian means MAGA. You have not educated yourself. You have a very prominent black libertarian saying, hey guys, here's a better approach. And we just run into this knee-jerk reaction. I don't need you to convince me. I'm telling you guys, the people that are looking that I'm doing outreach to are going to now go, oh yeah, they're not even open to have a conversation with Maj, and Maj is one of their own.
And this is a go ahead, Eric.
I want to ask a question about what Maj was talking about there, and before I do that, I want to pick up on what he was saying about the state's role in this. So I live in Tennessee. I live in Tennessee, so I see a lot of Confederate flags, and sometimes I love it when people criticize the Confederate flag, which is what it is. And I'm not, I don't like any flags. I'm an anarchist. So, but like the American flag, in its, had fewer stars back then, but for 60 years, that flag protected the Fugitive Slave Act and all that, which was the national government enforcing slavery. So slavery could not have happened if the local and national governments did not make it obligatory for people to help catch runaway slaves and all this stuff. So the state was basically providing a subsidy to the 1% of people in the South who owned slaves. Well, it was in the North too for a while, obviously, but those very rich people who had that were getting a subsidy from the government in a system that enforced that and kept that system alive. If it wasn't there, if the North would have seceded like William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass wanted them to and dropped the Fugitive Slave Act, then the slaves could have escaped to freedom very quickly instead of having to make it all the way to Canada. So there's all that history. And the state had a role in this. But the question I have for Maj is, I want to be able to say things like that to black voters who might be looking at the LP. But before I would get into that conversation, what is the average man on the street in the black community? Not the Nina Turner, Al Sharpton, whatever.
And then I have questions for a few reparations questions after this.
Yeah. So what would an average person that you're talking to who would actually like listen to me, maybe, like, again, not the people way out on the edge, but what is, when they hear reparations, what do they think and what do they want to hear? Like, is the man on the street saying, yes, we should all get a check from the government? It's probably not that, but I want to know what people like that, what they think about it.
I don't think it's just generally one answer. I think the willingness to even say, let's have a conversation about it and what that looks like. Yeah. And the things that you just said about the Fugitive Slave Act, if you're a libertarian saying the state, the United States government at different points were very, very detrimental to black communities. I don't live in black communities, meaning if I'm the white dude, I don't live in a black community right now, but this is the reality. Our party is in alignment with none of that type of shit. Yeah. That person's ear is open. But if you in reverse go, well, from a perspective of thinking again that reparations is a white people tax and it's only socialist, that blah, 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 all of that type of shit. And you lean in with that. All right, bro, you're not even like having the conversation. I think because the average Joe Blow from urban America isn't really even having a conversation about reparations. There are people that are in the minority that are loud on social media. You'd have more inroads with that person in an urban demographic by saying, we just kind of don't want the government involved in our shit, and we don't want people to be targeting certain demographics. And sorry, bro, I might not live here, but your hood is getting overreached into by the government more than anything else. Here's what our party would do to avoid that or stop that outright. That to me resonates more. I don't have a difficulty with having an in-depth conversation about reparations with people in the hood, because them same questions are, well, damn, bro, like, how would they know? How much would it be? Like, these are legitimate questions that anyone would ask. But when you lean in with this hardcore anti on a thing, as opposed to having a civil discussion about it, you lose that person. Period. Yep. You lose that person. It's like outreach 101. If I would say, yo, bro, weed is legal in our state that we live in. I'm the white dude. I live in a rural part of Pennsylvania. You live in Philly. They're targeting your community more, even though it's legal in our state up to a certain amount. But even then, if you get a certain amount, the feds at any given moment is still Schedule 1. That's still the government.
Yep.
So it should be out of there. Inroad. That person is. What Democrat is actually advocating for that, as well as educating no GOP members? They come from all drugs are bad perspective, so they're not even having the conversation. Mm-hmm. They're not even having the conversation.
Brandi.
Yeah. So one question. So you're not saying you understand that the concept is like how it would be able to happen is very complex and very hard to prove, right? Like it would be very difficult to like prove that you were a slave, an ancestor of a slave who was also owned by this corporation or these people that it turned into this corporation type of situation. So like you understand that part. So it's not like
there would not be like, because I can articulate the intelligence of a tactic does not mean that automatically means
every detail
automatically would be simple.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's like me showcasing when someone asks me, how is all gun control racist? I have case law, I have Supreme Court decisions, I have states that literally changed their state constitution from all able-bodied men can have guns to all able-bodied white men should have guns. There has to be a litany of facts and precedent. And I mean, shit, the United States Supreme Court, the Dred Scott decision was racist and anti-gun. And they went part and parcel. One of the judge's remarks was, we kind of can't say he's a human because then he'll be able to have a gun. That's a 2-for-1 for me when I'm explaining that. But this is a very difficult concept. I am not advocating that because it's difficult that people should not partake in it. That's like me saying, remember in Rocky when he was supposed to fight Drago and his wife Adrian was like, you can't win.
Yeah.
And he's like, what, dude, this is he's a mountain and he's taking all of the steroids and I'm kind of soft from being a champ for however long. And I'm emotional because he's killed my best friend that's responsible for me learning and being a champion, but I have to do it. Yep. So because I'm saying this is a conversation that we should have, and here's some libertarian perspectives that open us up to a Black demographic as opposed to just closing us off to it because we're not willing to have the conversation.
I think the conversation is important, and I fully agree with you. I think we should be having the conversation. I'm just a little critical of like how it would work, and
dig in. Go.
Me too.
And also like, so even like the 40 acres and a mule, which was promised by the government, like that's a government promise. So it's like, if those people got reparations, they would have to get those reparations from the government. And so the only way that could happen would be via tax money, which would be from people that didn't own slaves.
I think what Maj was talking about is there was a plan to like actually seize the plantation land and like sell it off or give it away and stuff like that. And
that's what the 40 acres
and Maj,
is going to be?
Yeah. So Maj actually said Andrew Jackson. He met Andrew Johnson.
I'm Andrew Johnson. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he took over after Lincoln, after John Wilkes Booth did what he did. But he stopped that plan. So they were going to take it directly from, what I like to call the 1% of the South at that time, and distribute it to the people who were literally just liberated.
So now when you're talking about that from that perspective, right? Now we're going into the economics of it. Let's just say if the United States government would have actually did what they said they were going to do. Let's just say that. Now we're not having conversations about when it festers and continues, and now you have people that may not have the best interests for Black people that want to call everything racist, right? They say home ownership or the lack thereof is racist, and then we go, what are you talking about? Just because I'm white doesn't mean at 19 they were like, here's your 750 credit score, go buy a house. You're looking at it from that perspective. When you're talking about hundreds of years of equity, land ownership, home ownership, you're talking about an economic debilitating thing. Even if we fast forward, let's not even go as far back as Andrew Johnson, because I did say Jackson.
Right.
Switching that up, right? Let's fast forward. Did you guys ever read this book called The Color of Law?
I think I've heard people talk about it, but yeah.
Oh my God. Oh my God. In like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the concept of redlining. If we give you money from this bank to build this development, you cannot have, like, contractually, you cannot have Black people live in, rent, or buy any homes in this development. This is not me saying it. It was literally race-based. So then when you're talking about the 30s, 40s, and 50s, which isn't 1,250, whatever years ago, when you're talking about that, and those families were able to refinance, pull some of that money out, pay for education, pay for a second home, so forth and so on. You're talking about something that impacted the people that were deliberately by the state, lawfully in conjunction with private banks, lawfully made to where you cannot participate in this situation, and there becomes an economic debilitating thing. The problem is, if we don't take that argument and blame it on where it needs to go, the private and corporate charters, right? Or the private owners, corporate charters, and the state, we leave that conversation and it's left out to an extreme leftist that does not have all of that information, is not going to tie it back into the state because the state had to sanction it in order for it to happen. We leave ourselves open, then we just look like we're arguing against all of this historical data. Sidebar, that book, The Color of Law, was written by a white Jewish dude. And it's all about how redlining, school choice, all of these things came out of those racist, that racist legislation. And the crazy thing is,
I feel like Thomas Sowell, well, I'm a huge fan of Thomas Sowell, and he has a lot of, obviously, critiques of the concept of reparations. And he even said, like, the other thing that comes to my mind is that I just don't even know. So say people did get reparations, and I don't even know if it would be even helpful. Because look at the welfare state and everything.
That's not the framework we're working with.
I know, but it's like, I know it's not the framework, but
reparations for stolen labor, broken contracts, and stolen property is not a welfare state. A welfare state is something where, hey, we just printing it up and giving it out to
that's
whoever.
The white tax. Yeah,
that's the actual white tax. Like after the World War, where it's like, all right, we're gonna start welfare, and by and large, it's mostly white people on welfare now. So, and I get it. I know people are gonna say, well, there's more white people in America. I get all of that, but my point in saying it is, we can't call, and I hate using leftist terms so much, but they are really good at stealing terms. They're really good at using terms.
They stole our term.
Oh my God, they're really good at it. When you call it, like, they have a phrase called, like, and I think they use it wrong, but I think the phrase is amazing, right? It's called restorative justice, right? I think that phrasing is
restitution. That's what they said in the chat. Yeah.
Right. All of these things are amazing terms, but when you look at it from that perspective, it's like, that's not a welfare state. And who are we to say, oh, I don't know if that would help you? That has nothing to do with you. If you're the person that's willing to say, hey, I'm going to prove, for example, restorative justice, if we're going to use that term as a placeholder right now, the family in Los Angeles, because I want to use a very recent situation. They had to do a lot of paperwork and search and digging and research. And then it was proven this land, this like and they did a goofy thing because they wound up selling it back to the state of California, which I think was so dumb. But nonetheless, if they did the due diligence to say, I can prove that I'm the lineage of this group of people or this person, this property was stolen, and I can prove that. Who is anybody else to say, well, I don't know if them giving you that home back would actually help you. Not like, you personally.
I wasn't saying that, and like I was just more correlating it because it's like, in the end, is it even going to
doesn't matter
make a difference? But that's unrelated to the discussion.
Right.
Just a comment.
If I can prove that I've been my family or my lineage, I'm the rightful heir. If I can prove that, and I do the due diligence to do that, if I fuck it up later, that's on me. Let's use this as an example. Let's say if every black person, somehow we get it all the way right? And corporate charters are taxed. It helps race relations. Black Americans feel like a whole has been, a wrong has been
a tax on corporate charters.
But hold on, let me say this. If let's say we got it all right, and all of the people that got whatever the number and land or whatever, they fucked it all up. The conversation ends.
Yeah.
We did you guys did your due diligence. We as the state, corporate charters, whoever, if white leftists that felt inclined to do so, put $8 a week from their check, which I think is retarded. But if they did that too, and they got it all the way right, and Shangri-La happened, this conversation ends.
Then you could buy a baby straight cash.
Well, wasn't there a Chappelle Show sketch about this?
That's what I was just referencing.
the Dave Chappelle Show, as well as the ATL, a more recent show, ATL with Donald
Atlanta.
Trump.
That's a great. I've only seen the first two seasons, but the first two seasons were great. I like.
There's an episode where all America gives black people reparations, and the way that they package it, which I think is very dangerous. They package it on these mainstream media shows where it looks like a white tax. And in the actual episode, all of the white people, when they paychecks came, they had to get in a separate line, and like their extra money had to come out of their check. So if I happen to be a white person, which I'm not, but if I was, I would go like, yo, that's kind of fucked up. But then you'd have to think, as white people, you got to go, maybe the same mainstream media narrative that's painting me as the racist and the bigot, maybe they're telling me something about reparations that may not be true too. Like propaganda doesn't only work one way. Propaganda will be used for whatever we need to be used for. And so
let me make a couple points, and let me give like a quick review, because we've been talking for like an hour and a half now. Quick bullet points.
Just an hour.
Just an hour, my bad. So quick bullet points. We're talking about a different way of looking at quote unquote reparations and through a libertarian lens. This was put forward by Walter Block and Murray Rothbard about 50 years ago. And this has nothing to do with taxes. It has nothing to do with a white tax. It has nothing to do with government redistribution of wealth from white people to black people, all of that. It's a way of looking at quote unquote reparations as basically a civil suit if somebody can prove that that somebody else was the recipient of stolen goods that ought to have gone to their lineage, like directly, and they would have to prove that in a court. Now, so like that's where we're at here. And I think even within that libertarian framework, and I want to get to this in a minute, the question from a libertarian mindset is, can you make a claim on something that far on the past? I think that's I think that's where it kind of comes down even within libertarians. Now, I wanted to go back to what Brandi was saying and just address one thing of like when people say, oh, well, who will build the roads? The answer is, like, broadly speaking, general contractors. That doesn't mean that I know the details of what the market rate of road laying will be, or what company is going to pop up and who's going to take the contract and what the terms of that contract are going to look like. I just know that there's a market demand for roads that will most likely be filled because we're sophisticated enough to do like privatized space exploration and stuff like that. And court cases can get pretty complex. I mean, when you look at like the lawsuits that brought down the mafia, like prior to RICO rules, they couldn't take down the mafia because every single individual, like you had to have crimes against each individual. So then RICO came in and basically they said, we have to prove that every single one of these individuals is part of a broader criminal enterprise. Now you're talking about a very complex web of crime and relationships and all this stuff that's difficult to prove, but it could be done in theory. Right. So bringing it all back to say, again, we're talking about something that's very narrow. You know, I would agree that probably reparations, if we can make our own term and push that into the culture, that would probably be my way to go about it. But one thing I've always liked about you, Maj, this is my last point. One thing I've always liked is that you have been very open that you are trying to play a particular role. Yeah. Like, and that your role, as you see it, is to try to, I remember you said this when I first met you, that is to try to translate libertarianism back to people in the hood, because if it were me walking around saying that they might just hear Ronald Reagan, where you look like them, sound like them, come from their neighborhoods, they might actually listen to you in a way that they might not listen to me. And I'm of the opinion that, so like for me, when I got into libertarianism, it was Ron Paul and the Fed and the wars, right? And the Federal Reserve and all that stuff is the thing that like captured me and you know, got me into it. But if we want the ideas to spread, different people from different backgrounds are going to be asking different questions and looking for different answers out of our ideas. Right. And if there is an answer that we can give them, we should try to give it. And I think that's what this conversation and what Walter Block and Murray Rothbard were attempting to do by looking at reparations through like a more delineation of property rights lend in the context of like civil suits or tort law, essentially.
Right. I think that the biggest impediment to this conversation is people will have to accept their conditioning as it relates to they have not looked at it through that lens that you just mentioned, or those lenses. They've looked at it through, this is something that extreme lefties want because they just like free stuff. And their approach to it is damn near defensive. And I get it. I don't rock with socialism. I don't rock with communism. Simple. I can say, I think there's flaws in how people are approaching this conversation. If I was inclined to actually fight it, I would not fight it that way. Right? I just wouldn't. I think it's too complex. I think each individual will have to do it. Maybe it's a class action suit. Again, that's what Johnny Cochran was researching and fleshing out with the reparations assessment group. All right. Yeah. That's that. But I'm, to your point, Mike, I am a fan of what tactics are going to spread liberty, to be quite honest, in a demographic that the libertarian movement needs and currently does not have many people that are can speak the language there, right? So because of that, when I see the responses, when I see, oh, these crazy libtards, you're doing the same thing that the MAGA cult does. Yeah. And it makes you look bad. It is not a robust, well thought out tactic. Tactics are short term. Strategies are long term. My job is to spread libertarian values and get people to join a party from a demographic that has a ton in alignment with our values. But
if I could get somebody who is concerned about reparations and looks at it through the traditional lens of a white tax or government redistribution of wealth, if I could have a conversation with them and address that and get them to come closer to this, I mean, that's a pretty radical change. You know what I mean? Like so I would prefer that they would be open to something like this. But what we haven't gotten to is like, we're all libertarians here. So which I think the question, even within this framework that this kind of turns on, is, can you make that claim? Is there still a rightful claim after 150 years? I think, like Brandi, I think what I'm trying to get at addresses your question of like the sins of the ancestors and that kind of thing. Like, if even if there is a provable tort 100 years or 150 years later. So, yes.
Well, I want to jump in on that because, like, I think that from a practical standpoint, if I were in a conversation with someone, a black person who was like, hey, what do the libertarians think about reparations? I would say, okay, I would give them basically the Rothbard Block argument and say, to be quite honest, I think that you're going to, like what Maj just said, to actually prove it and to, to do the actual legal work of all that is pretty difficult. I don't know if we're ever going to get to that point where we could actually do that. Is it practical, and is it possible? Would there be the political will, the political ability for us to get that done?
Political will.
Well, but my point is that I would say, yes, I agree with it in principle from individuals to individuals. I don't think practically that's ever really going to happen. But what can we do now? We can stop the drug war. We can stop all the crazy criminal justice stuff. We could somehow fix the schools. We should, that's what I would say. But what I think what Maj is saying is by being willing to listen to someone else's perspective on reparations and give my libertarian view on it, and then say, yeah, I don't think we can actually get that done. Why don't you join us on the things that we can get done? I think by listening to them, we win that credibility.
And let's get real. There's a lot of things that we as libertarians believe that is not feasible. Like, are we really going to privatize the whole country? Probably not, but that is libertarianism. like making private property of the entire country is the libertarian position. Is that feasible? It's not, but it's still looking at it from the principle and seeing what do we have to offer to answer this question.
I think that to say, if you want to journey upon this endeavor, you are welcome to. I think that you have value, and here's how it aligns with libertarian values as it relates to tort, as it relates to contracts, as it relates to property, as it relates to labor. Do I think that that's it? You're welcome to it. That, and even listening to where somebody's coming from and presenting it that way is the olive branch. I'm also saying that I wouldn't say, I don't think we can get it done. I'd say that's a hell of an endeavor. Good luck. And I'm more so talking to libertarians. I'm saying the libertarian position is not in direct opposition to this. It is if your understanding of reparations is from a skewed perspective. And again, reverse it, because I don't want to keep repeating the same thing, but I feel like I have to.
Well, it's not skewed. That's the mainline position. We're the ones kind of bringing this new way of looking at it.
Well, that's why I almost agree with people saying that we should change the word, because I think that like arbitration or something, because we have a reparations task force in Boston, and it is definitely not anything like this. So I'm like,
I mean, it
doesn't mean this.
It is a totally different framework. Yeah, I mean, that's true.
What I would do is I would say, because those people are not advocating for, most of the people that are talking about reparations that we come across on television haven't even read From Here to Equality. There is a couple that has done conversations and the research and broken this down thoroughly for 30 years. Most of the people that are having a conversation about reparations have not even read their work. So that's the people that are talking about reparations that, yet again, leftist media highlighted them and said, this is what reparations means. Again, if we can wrap our brains around, the reason why I'm uniquely positioned to say this way is because I can see all of the time where people on the libertarian side, on the conservative side, on the leftist side, keep getting tricked by the merging of mainstream media and government propaganda. So we're chasing this thing that's not even the thing. Reverse, somebody's like, oh, you libertarians are just Republicans. That's not what we are. We're a completely separate thing than what you've actually been told what this is. The educational component. This is why the outreach is so key. I just keep seeing small guys, very limited guys, that have a platform that are on Twitter getting it wrong because they're chasing the wrong thing. It's like when people say, oh, go woke, go broke. They don't even know the origin of the phrase woke. They're using it wrong from the gate. So,
I would say there's both examples for what you're saying and against what you're saying. Like for me, I will not use woke. I use awake. Like I would use awake. Woke is gone. However, one that's in favor, like that we as libertarians do all the time. The mainstream definition of inflation is not what we as libertarians mean when we say inflation. Inflation, in terms of the average person who even knows about inflation, is increase in prices. but it's an increase in the money supply.
Correct.
But we don't say, oh, well, that's gone, blah, blah, blah. No, like we have the original, like that was the original definition. And we really go hard on economics as libertarians and the Fed and all that. So we use it our way. So I don't know. It's like, I don't know what the balance would be for like when it's worthwhile to stick with a word or worthwhile to give up a word. I'm telling you, liberals gone. I'm going.
Every time. You are charged with the responsibility of being educators every time you open your mouth as a libertarian. Not only because we know that the general public and the Department of Education is not explaining this to our people, to Americans. They're not.
Oh,
on top of
that's
that,
so much work. That is so much work. Like liberal is gone. Well, hold on, because liberal is gone. They and then we stole. Well, Rothbard stole libertarian from the left in return. You know what I mean? So like, I would just say, let them have liberal. Let's not mix it up.
Take everything from them and give them nothing.
I still keep the word liberal. I don't let people have that
word. So for example, when I say, I'll give a best example, and if y'all guys want to move on, we can. I'll give a perfect.
Well, we got 15 minutes, and there's two things I want to tackle. But go ahead.
Oh, shit.
We don't have a hard end at 9. I mean, it's up to our guests how long we go. I mean,
I'm down.
But yeah.
So when you guys remember the first time that what's his name, Colin Kaepernick explained why he was taking the knee. That interview, it was a maybe 2 or 3 minute interview, was in the locker room. He explained very well. He said, "This is not to be disrespectful to America. This is not to be disrespectful to veterans. A combat veteran actually told me I should take the knee as opposed to just sitting down." He explained why. He explained boom, 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 boom. It was perfect. Then he got quiet. Then mainstream media made it about the exact opposite things of what he said. He just said, he hates America. Then he wore the socks with the pigs on him. It did not help his messaging. It did not help where he was trying to go.
I laughed at that.
It was just like, bro, you gave them the thing. We have to be consistent in every single time that we speak. The last time that I spoke aggressively on Twitter, I could have worded it better. And all it served to do was get me kicked off of Twitter and further paint me as a homophobe and a transphobe or whatever people want to call me that particular week, right? If I would have
separationist,
separationist, all of that.
I said reparationist. My baby, keep going. You're in a flow.
If I would have messaged and worded that better, I'd still have the energy from the tweet, and I would not have been kicked off of Twitter at 150, 54, whatever thousand Twitter followers. That is a failure of mine to put the work in to articulate that in a way that you got to go extremely out of your way to paint me as whatever. And that was failure. That's the reality. So as libertarians, yes, if someone says liberal and I say, well, you mean liberal in the current sense or the classic sense? And they go, well, what's the difference? Teachable moment. We are educators. And every time we have those opportunities, Mike, when you out and you see an opportunity to have a conversation about libertarianism, you take the moment, you take the opportunity. This is what we have to do. We are up against a Goliath. That's so
let me clarify. Yeah, take the opportunity to have the conversation. But am I going to go on a crusade to reclaim liberal? Nah, fuck that. Like in a conversation, I'll make the distinction, but I'm not going to go on a crusade, because here's where that logic goes. One, we can't even use libertarian anymore because that was in fact like a left anarchist word that we homesteaded, and and it also means that we would have to fight for the swastika, because the swastika was an Indian symbol of peace way before it was for the German Nationalist Party. It's just not a fight I'm interested in.
I'll give you even further. I'll give you even further. Before it was an Indian symbol on Buddha's forehead, it was an African Adinkra symbol. So, am I going to go get a swastika tattooed on me? No, to your point, I'm not going to do that. But at the same time, if the swastika comes up and I'm going, well, if you're supposed to be Aryan is Indian, they melanated as hell over there in India. So if I can push back against some of the messaging and drop them jewels every opportunity that I get, I'm not sending my bandwidth everywhere. So I get your point. And I agree.
Well, and that's the point. And I think in our messaging is that I think sometimes libertarians get backed into the box of like the classic is, of course, oh, well, who will build the roads? And then we go off into a 30-minute lecture on how the roads would get built. But the point is we should always take these moments to acknowledge what they're saying, connect with them on some level, and then turn it over to get back on topic of what we want to talk about, which is how the state is screwing up in that particular way or whatever. So I think that we owe people the dignity of like listening to their arguments and acknowledging what they're saying, but we also have the right to turn the conversation into what we think is a more profitable way. And I think we should always take that. And what I think Maj has said this whole time is if the first thing you say when somebody brings up reparations is, oh, screw that, you're just a commie or Black Lives Matter Marxist, like right away they're not going to listen. They still might not listen if you acknowledge what they say and then talk libertarianism to them, but they might, and so I think that that's the thing is we should not get trapped into debating things on someone else's terms. We should always look for the opportunity to turn things around to what we think as libertarians is the most sort of important thing going on in a particular issue.
So two quick things. Because I still don't think we've had the conversation. I would like to hear your input on this, Aaron, is again, in the chat from a libertarian and from a libertarian perspective, I think we should try to answer the question of, does the claim exist 150 years? Forget the logistics of can you prove it? Just in theory, as a principle, does can the claim exist after 150 years? That's one. And two, the fun one is, what about again, in theory, like a black tax moratorium, or we could drill down and be like, well, a descendant moratorium or whatever. But let me use some freehand here, goddammit. A tax moratorium.
I would say the principle is there, and that arguing the details is something that should be done in any sort of, like, if somebody damages my property, then he has to prove his case. And so the principle is whether he damaged it yesterday or, however long ago. I don't think for a true moral actual claim, there is no expiration date on that. There is a question of like, what is a descendant and inheritance and stuff like that. That's another thing. So like, strictly speaking, I've seen some comments in the chat of like, well, I didn't do anything wrong and no slaves are still alive today, so end of story. That's not quite the point. I mean, so I think that there is a place for some of these things. And the example he gave, Maj gave about the thing with the beach is, pretty, that didn't happen, I don't think, in the 1800s, but like it happened at some point. They worked it out. They actually went through the trial or the arbitration or whatever. And so, yeah, I think that there's no expiration date on it.
Hang on, I want to address this comment. Somebody said there is an expiration date when everyone involved is dead. So hypothetically, now this is obviously a super direct, super simple one, a lot more simple than the quote unquote reparations one. But let's say your grandfather is dying and I'm his power of attorney as a lawyer for his estate. You're in the will to get the estate, and then I embezzle it. Well, the person who built that wealth is dead. What's your claim?
And to use the example,
yeah, like
well, the Palestine example, most of the Israelis who did the ethnic cleansing in Palestine, most of those guys are dead, and most of the people who were actually moved off the land now are dead, although there's some people who as children were in 1948 or whatever. But so like, let's say it's 10 years from now and everybody's dead, but I can see my grandfather's house, and to me that's not that is not a dead claim, because everybody involved in the original crime was dead.
So let me just ask you directly, because again, I think even within this framework, this is what the concept turns on from a libertarian perspective. Why would you say there's no expiration date?
Well, if something is right or wrong, it's right or wrong for eternity, right? Like, and it's then if you can sort it out, and like to go back to the example of the Palestinian thing, let's say everybody involved is dead, but it's clear that if that person would have had their will and stuff properly probated and all that stuff, that you can give money to your heirs and give property to your heirs. And so if it is traceable, then I think from listening to Walter Block and just using common sense, that just because everybody involved in the original incident is dead does not mean that it's game over. It then gets very complicated, but in some cases it is worth, if someone wants to press the claim, then in a purely libertarian society, then the conflict resolution mechanisms would hear that claim. And if there was evidence and it could all be worked out within the custom and the laws that are all agreed upon, then I think that should go forward.
Brandi, what do you think?
Well, I did see someone in chat mention something about how, what if they just got tax exemption status instead? Like,
Yeah, that's a funner one. That's the funner one.
I'll say one sentence on that, and then I'll shut up. Is what the great Walter Williams said: "I am for a tax cut for any person of any amount for any reason." So I'll go with Walter Williams on that.
Well, obviously, clearly, I would prefer just no taxes at all. But that also is an option, though. For
I want to go back to the person that says, if everybody's dead, then such and such and such. That's more of that dismissive, that's so basic bitch 101. It's like,
I just gotta kill your whole family to get your house.
Right. It's like, that's it. If it crashed.
Oh, where'd it go?
That crashed. If your internet crashes.
Did the opponents of Maj's point hacked our system?
Separation.
Oh my goodness! But
I mean, I don't know how I feel about this whole concept of justice via descendants, like you being liable for like what I said earlier, you being liable for the sins of your great grandfather.
Let me use a distinctly Misesian concept. Aaron, if you can remind me of the term for it. I feel like a dummy that I can't remember what the term is. But the idea that if you were to trace money backwards and be like, okay, so it has value today because it had value yesterday, and then it had value the day before, and this is how gold became money. Do you remember the
is it the recursive
no
it's not that
oh god, somebody please Google it for me because I'm a dummy and I forget.
Regression
yes
theory.
Thank you, the regression theorem. Is that basically you can trace money back to say, okay, well, money has value today because it has value yesterday, and then it had value the day before, and you could go all the way back to when gold became money to kind of make this distinction. It has this temporal element. I would apply that same kind of test to say, okay, well, if it was a crime then, when did it at what day and for what reason did it cease being a crime? You know what I mean?
Right.
Now, it's totally like a thing where it's like at some point, there's probably caveman crimes where technically speaking, in theory, there is an open claim. Is there any logistical possibility of doing that? No. You know what I mean? No, of course not. So there is an expiration date in terms of the logistics of it dies, but not the principle.
Brandi can talk if you want to see if what's up with Maj if you want. Brandi, what do you think?
I probably got a hungry baby, which was why my heart out was not.
Well, if we need to go, just you want to touch base with Maj to make sure he didn't have any super important thing he wanted to say.
One final thing we were going to talk about, but I guess it's not.
I think we're going to do that another.
No, with Maj.
Well, I think we might hold that for another day.
Okay.
I think look in the chat there, Brandi, in the private chat, and I think me and Mike talked about it. I hate to be cryptic, but
okay.
So,
but anyway, to answer that question, my answer, and I think you already answered it. My answer to the black tax moratorium is, in principle, but there's going to be a lot of social strife. I say that because I wouldn't. Yeah, but it's a good, in my opinion, it's a good litmus test. It's a good theoretical litmus test question of, is the principle more important than the culture war kind of thing? Because it would flare up the culture war in along racial lines for sure, but it would also keep a lot more money out of the hands of the state and that's what I'm for.
And I'm for, finding all kinds of other things too. I mean, somebody earlier on talked about the, you know, different people who came here as indentured servants, or the Irish and Italians who were treated bad when they came over. I feel bad because my people, the Harris people, came over at Jamestown, so we were early on. But so I wouldn't get any of that. But the point is that I think the major point that I got from Maj, and I suspected that this, just from reading in between the lines on all his tweets and hearing him talk about it, is if it's something that, I know a lot of black people, and like a lot of, obviously they're going to have a different, the average black person is going to have a different take on this than the average white person. And to just immediately, when a certain term comes up, just shut off all discussion and say that's Marxist, that's racist, whatever. That
you
don't, you're not going to build any, you're not going to build any credibility with people doing that. And so that's why you have the conversation. And if their view of reparations is, yes, tax all white people to give all black people X, Y, and Z, even black people like Barack Obama and Kamala Harris, who, they're not descendants of American slaves, and they're super
even the
privileged.
civil rights leaders rejected that. Like, there's no,
But I mean, okay.
Go for it.
Theoretically, though, like, what if it was like this super like billionaire black person, and they had the resources to sue and to get those reparations? Technically, they could. I mean,
but again, where the logistical rubber meets the road there is if they could prove it, which is very, very difficult. You know what I mean? Like, because it can't be like lawsuits are between individuals. I'm making a claim about you. I'm claiming that you caused this damage. Here is all the proof. I'm setting this to an adjudicator to weigh that against case law, whatnot, to render a judgment. It can't be this nebulous.
Money. Like, it would cost so much money and resources
privately
to prove it. Yeah,
privately.
Like, so the only people that'd be able to prove it would be the people that already have the money.
Or maybe there's some cool black lawyers that would take it on a
pro bono,
like a big class action or whatever. Yeah,
or it could be a class action, or they could take it out when they win.
I've been meaning to bring this up the whole show, but I want to go back to a tweet from July 16th, 2019 by the all-time greatest Twitter user ever. And of course, I'm talking about Michael Malice. I think this Republican senator was talking about a bill of like putting universities on the hook for student loan debt. So like making universities pay for, to, instead of the taxpayer bailing them out, to make the universities bail them out. And Mike, he interjected himself to say, which I think this is one of my top 10 favorite tweets of all time: seize all university endowments, the crystallization of privilege, and distribute the money as reparations. Like take the money from like the Harvard and Northwestern and all them people. That I think that would be that would be hilarious.
That's probably an acceptable middle ground,
right? Yeah.
The final thing I just wanted to say is that I do think people need to be more open-minded about having these conversations, which is what I think Maj's point was. Yeah. Is like, instead of getting so butthurt and immediately defensive when the concept of reparations comes up, we should be having these discussions, and there shouldn't be anything off the table in regards to like what we can discuss or what is okay to talk about or of being possible, even if you might not agree with it, Yeah. I think there's a lot of people
we all got to grow up.
Yeah, a lot of people instantly shut down when it comes to this stuff, and you shouldn't. Be open-minded.
I think
Libertarians are supposed to be high in openness.
We should think about maybe trying to. I think it would be neat to get a debate, whether it's Maj on the one side, or I would even be willing to take the Maj side on this, against some of these people who are libertarians and who are very anti. It would be interesting if we could get two people who were actually in good faith would argue this, because I think a lot of the people, again, there's a certain corner of libertarian Twitter who are disingenuous.
I think we do need it in the current podcast sphere, because these debates have happened already. That's the thing. Like Walter Block has had debates on this. It's why I'm a little like taken aback of like the knee jerk that this hasn't been around for 50 years and the people who were like, we shouldn't be discussing reparations no matter what. It's like, you're not cooler than Rothbard, dude. Sorry. Like, yeah, like,
and I think the rebrand is a possibility too, because and the whole question of like taking back terms, I think that's pretty difficult. But I said it a couple times already. When that term comes up, oh well, what do you mean by that? Well, as a libertarian, I would support it if you meant this X, Y, and Z, and to get the debate over onto our terms and not make it to be what to not make it be the white people tax, which is what a lot of people
and
on the left want it to be.
It might sound ridiculous, but I used to do like man on the street interviews and stuff like that. And you'd be surprised what people will talk to you about if you have real world conversations and actual honest conversations, and not like this Twitter, I'm going to be the biggest cocksucker I could imagine thing. You know what I mean? Like, and actually like engage with people. So let's close on that. And yeah, I mean, I'll talk to Maj. I agree with you. I would try to strike that. I would take that side of his on the debate, and I think it's needed, and let's see if we can make it happen.
So do we have an announcement for next week's guest that we're able to make?
Yeah, Brandi, you got to make that. You did good work on that one.
So Jake, the QAnon January 6th shaman, will be here next Monday, 7:30.
That's
whoop, whoop.
That's pretty great. That's why we brought Brandi in, because she can pull some of the stuff that I wouldn't have even thought about trying to get that guy, but
I cannot wait to find out how he convinced the cops to let him in.
I know, that's my question too. I think that's my number one question.
One of my other favorite top 10 tweets of all time was the late great Norm Macdonald. He tweeted a picture of the January 6th rioters like walking, through the Capitol Rotunda or whatever, between like the velvet ropes, and the tweet was something like, shout out to remembering
Maj is
when.
Back.
Yeah, Maj is back. Hey Maj.
Yo.
We didn't boot you. We're
No, that was my MacBook died. My bad, y'all.
That's all right.
I redlined you out of this.
Someone asked, is Brandi high? No, I'm not high. Do I seem high?
We know that Maj, the fact that you're a Mac guy, that's good, because I take heat from a lot of libertarians because I'm a Mac guy and because I don't like metal, and they think I'm some kind of square, and maybe I am, but I'm glad that the coolest guy I know is also a Mac guy.
Yeah. Well, Maj, we were actually wrapping up. So where can people find your work and support you?
Follow on the new Twitter page I got kicked off a couple of months back. Maj Toure 999. That @ right there. We just broke $200,000 raised today and given away. We haven't given away that $2,500 yet, but we will be going. I spoke to some prominent libertarians around the country. We will be going to do libertarian outreach in all of these same cities, just like we did with Black Guns Matter. One of the first ones will be Manchester, New Hampshire. So we'll be in New Hampshire doing some actual liberty work in New Hampshire, in the areas where I don't know. Some people just feel like they shouldn't do that outreach. So we'll be in Manchester doing a lot of that work. We don't want to argue. You entertain the clown, you be a part of the circus. So we would rather build towers to liberty. So we're going to start that in Manchester, and then after that we're going to go to all of the areas. Boston is one of them.
Let me know if you come to Boston. I think there's a lot of good places around here that
100%.
Yeah.
We're going to go also to all of the places that have the most homicides. The areas that have the most homicides usually have the most restrictive and oppressive legislation, especially that doesn't allow people to defend themselves. So we want to merge this liberty community with the Second Amendment community. And I say merge in the sense of expand and make people, into those urban demographics. So we're just going to do the work. So follow me on Twitter, everybody. Maj Toure 999. Same thing on Instagram. That's one of the pages. The other one is Big Daddy Toure. And lastly, I wanted to tap back in. Obviously, Give, Send, Go, all of that stuff's in the, in the headline. But just a reminder, and I say this on a lot of the podcasts that we do, everybody, please, please, please be kind to yourself and be kind to others. You guys that are listening to this, have been through one of the biggest psychological operations in human history over the last 2 or 3 years. If you're feeling a little bit depressed, if you're feeling a little bit not yourself, that's fine. Go easy on yourself, man. You survived it. A lot of people killed themselves.
Yep.
A lot of people got coerced into medical procedures that they did not want to. A lot of people gave up their bodily autonomy. If you did not, and you feeling a little drained, be kind to yourself. Give others grace because they going through, some of that same psychological operation too. So let's just be kind to each other. I apologize to everyone for my laptop kind of dying on me, but I just wanted to say thank you all for having me today, allowing me to share from a perspective that is not me. It's just me challenging folks to just think of things a little bit differently, so we have a better tactic or better tactics as we approach this endeavor of getting the liberty movement where it needs to be in the urban demographic. The Democratic Party is not going to let the mental stranglehold that they have over that demographic go very easily. So we have a lot of work to do. So thank you all for just allowing me to share and critique a little bit and challenge folks to just our approach and how we, get into different demographics. So thank you all a whole lot.
Yeah, thanks, Maj. I appreciate it. It's been too long since we had you on. And you coming anywhere close to Knoxville?
Yes, I was just in Memphis last week.
That's 6 hours away, man. Knoxville.
Yeah. Oh yeah, shit, right. Well, I'm in the same state, right?
Yeah, it's the same state, but it's a big state.
I had drove like 16 hours, so I was like tapped out. But yeah, I'm coming back down there, and one of my good buddies is John Hickok 45 son.
Okay.
Well, he's in Chicago right now because he's a comedian. But yeah, the next time I go down there I'll make sure I try to stop at Hickok's his compound down there and do some shooting and stuff. But yeah, I'm wherever the libertarians want me to come, we showing up, we doing the work, we going to the hood. Like all of this, like being in the suburban spots, fuck that, bro.
Yep.
We gotta bring that movement to the people. And so I just want to be of
We're
service.
hitting the cookouts.
Yeah.
100%.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Come see us next Monday at 7:30 Eastern. Thanks, guys.
And then see next Monday at 7:30 Eastern. TakeHumanAction.com. Become a recurring donor. Help us support Project Decentralized Revolution. Help us to how would you verb this? Reparate? Yeah, help us to reparate these city council candidates, these mayor candidates, these school board candidates. They need it.
They need it.
They're entitled.
See you guys.
Peace, y'all.